Snow didn't fall in King's Landing, but the cold still crept into every stone step of the Red Keep as if winter had mailed an early warning. Ned Stark's death didn't hit Westeros with a boom like a firework, but with the soft click of a loosened hinge, just before the entire door of history groaned and twisted open. Ordinary folk didn't need to read books or study maps to know what was coming. One look at the pale, frantic nobles rushing from room to room was enough. Chaos had officially gone on air. Joffrey sat on the Iron Throne like a child who'd just seized the office swivel chair, delighted, confident, and blissfully unaware that leaning the wrong way could snap his neck. It was strange that an entire kingdom had to obey this 13-year-old creature. But Westeros had a long tradition of never learning anything. A boy with arms as thin as kindling now had the power to order executions. Why? Because he was born on the right day, in the correct order, with the right grandfather behind him. That's it. Across the realm, rumors spread fast. Not one, not two, but 3 people were claiming to be the real king. In the north, Robb Stark, a 17-year-old with the face of the boy from a respectable family, was hailed as king in the north. On Dragonstone, Stannis chewed on the law and declared, "Only I am legitimate." And Renly, well, Renly only needed to look in a mirror to find enough justification to be king. Westeros suddenly resembled an apartment block with a blown fuse, everyone rushing into the hallway to grab the main switch with no idea what the switch even connected to. Amid all the murmurs, one question cut through like a thin, sharp blade. Who's sane enough to stop this kingdom from burning down? The answer, ironically, was not a hero, nor a warrior, nor someone with noble blood, but a dwarf who liked wine, liked books, and knew exactly when to tell the truth. But hold on. Before Tyrion arrives to start fixing things like a construction rescue team, Westeros needs a proper diagnosis. This place is a pressure cooker perched on a psychological stovetop. In King's Landing, going to the market felt like going into battle. Rage simmered under the surface like the smell of spoiled fish. No matter how hard one tried to chase it off, it clung. Everyone knew the crown had just killed a Stark, and the Starks were not the sort of family to let things slide. Unease hung in the air like fine dust. One breath and you knew something bad was coming. In the north, dire wolves howled through the night as if warning, "We're not safe here either." In the Stormlands, Renly threw weddings and feasts like war didn't exist. Classic, "I'm gorgeous, so I must be right" behavior. On Dragonstone, Stannis read Ned's letter like a utility bill. The more he read, the deeper the frown. And the deeper the frown, the greater his determination to collect what he believed he was owed. The entire continent was a chaotic orchestra, war drums, whispering schemes, galloping horses, swords sliding from scabbards, and between them, the cries, laughter, and sighs of ordinary people. And in that jumbled soundtrack, Tyrion Lannister's small face was about to appear like a candle in a dark room, not blinding, but just bright enough to reveal everything on the verge of collapse. That night, the wind sweeping in from the sea carried the salt of waves and the metallic scent of blood. A strange omen, the last warm breeze of the season somehow chilled the bone. A guard on the ramparts looked down at the streets, sighed, and muttered, "I wonder if I'll still get breakfast tomorrow." It was the kind of prophecy only Westeros could produce, simple, bleak, and usually correct. By dawn, before the city could settle into silence, the clatter of wheels echoed from the gates. A Lannister caravan rolled in, sunlight glinting off polished helms and golden lions stitched into bright red cloaks. And in the middle of it all, a small man parted the curtains and yawned, wearing the expression of someone who knew he was the only one arriving actually to work. The audience didn't know it yet. King's Landing didn't know it yet, but Tyrion did. If he didn't walk into the castle today, the city would be in flames before the week was over. And that was the turning point, the moment the story shifted from the moans of a kingdom collapsing to the footsteps of the man about to rearrange the board, using nothing but his mouth and a few cups of wine. Because this season, Westeros doesn't need a hero. Westeros needs someone smart enough to know everyone else is an idiot. Tyrion Lannister walked into the Red Keep with the mood of a man sent to repair a house whose foundations had collapsed, while the homeowner insisted, "Just replace the front door and it'll be fine." From afar, King's Landing still looked like a glorious city under sunlight. Red walls, towering spires, golden lion banners fluttering proudly. But the closer Tyrion got, the clearer the ridiculous truth revealed itself. All that splendor was just makeup trying to hide the bare face of a kingdom about to explode. The moment the carriage stopped, Tyrion hopped down with his usual gait, slightly swaying, slightly lazy, but with eyes sharp enough to make anyone uncomfortable. He scanned the Lannister guards lined up to greet him, studied each expression, then cleared his throat as if preparing to lecture a classroom full of troublemakers. "I leave for 1 season, and you lot look like you've gone through 3 droughts," he muttered. The guards weren't sure whether to laugh or stay silent, so they picked silence, the safest option when dealing with the only Lannister who used his brain without the impulsive setting. Inside the castle, Cersei sat in the council chamber, her beautiful face stretched tight like a drum. Her attendants paced back and forth, panicked as an anthill poked with a stick. War chaos from the fronts, famine rising in the west, the simmering anger among the people, and the Iron Throne currently occupied by Joffrey, all of it blended into the perfect cocktail of condensed disaster. When the door opened and Tyrion entered, Cersei glanced at him for half a second before narrowing her eyes. "What are you doing here?" Tyrion tilted his head, smiling in that, "I know the answer, but I'd rather make it sound witty way. I'm here to save the family, and while I'm at it, save this city too, if it isn't too late." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Cersei knew, and hated having to admit, that he was right. Tyrion didn't sit down immediately. He strolled a full circle around the room like he was sniffing out its scent, tension, failure, and the unmistakable odor of bad decisions only madmen would be proud of. This room used to be where sharp-minded statesmen discussed matters of the realm. Now, under Joffrey, it felt more like a teacher's lounge after kindergarten nap time. Chaotic, messy, full of exhausted sighs. After a moment, Tyrion pulled out a chair, sat, and laced his fingers. "I heard Joffrey just executed a few innocent people in the square. For fun." Cersei narrowed her eyes. "He's asserting his authority." "Ah," Tyrion nodded. "I forgot. Here, killing people at random also counts as asserting authority. I should write a book, the complete encyclopedia for recently crowned children." Cersei clenched her teeth hard enough to crack something. Before she could snap back, Joffrey strode in, like a whirlwind filled with teenage hormones and the danger level of handing a butcher's knife to a toddler. "So it's you?" Joffrey raised an eyebrow at Tyrion. "I don't recall permitting you to be here." Tyrion blinked. "I know. You're the king. And kings don't have to remember anything, especially important things." Tyrion's sarcasm didn't need a weapon. It was soft, thin, and pierced Joffrey's ego like a needle popping a balloon. Joffrey almost shouted back, but seeing Cersei watching him, he pressed his lips together like frozen butter. Tyrion rose and approached him. "I hear you've been beheading dissenters. The city is running out of food, but at least we won't run out of heads for decoration." Cersei exhaled sharply, warning him with her eyes, "Enough." But Tyrion shook his head, gentle but solid. "No, not enough, and that, dear sister, is exactly the problem." Silence dropped over the room, thick as dust on an old book. The council members sat like carved wooden statues, terrified that even breathing wrong might earn Joffrey's wrath. Tyrion stepped back, hands behind his back, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "Listen, we're losing. Not on the battlefield, no. We're losing in the hearts of the people. And when the people hate us, high walls mean nothing. Cold. Truth, but painfully logical. No one dared disagree." Tyrion continued, "I'm here as Hand of the King, appointed by our father, the only powerful man in Westeros who still seems sane." Cersei shot to her feet. "You think I'm not sane?" Tyrion looked at her the way one looks at a drunk person, insisting they're sober. "Cersei, if you were sane, this city wouldn't smell of smoke and echo with weeping." Cersei flushed, part fury, part the sting of knowing he was right. Tyrion sat again, sighing, his voice soft enough to lull someone to sleep. "First, I'll speak with the council, the guards, the people, even the grain merchants in the market. Second, I'll teach Joffrey how to smile less and think more. Third, protect this city from itself." Joffrey scoffed. "You think you can save anyone?" Tyrion stared straight at him. "No, I don't save people. I just stop stupid people from doing more stupid things, and sometimes that's enough to save a kingdom." No one replied, but in that silence, it was clear. Red Keep had just gained its first functioning adult in a long time. As Tyrion left the room, the afternoon light fell across his red cloak, and in that moment, the audience could almost see the future. In a season of chaos, a wine-drinking, book-reading, sharp-tongued dwarf would be the only anchor holding the city together. Because in Westeros, sometimes what keeps a kingdom from collapsing isn't a sword, nor a dragon, nor a noble bloodline, but a brain that knows how to think, and a mouth that knows when to speak. King's Landing, even after weeks of Tyrion's arrival, wasn't doing any better. The streets were full of rumors, the granaries were full of rats instead of grain, and the townsfolk lived with a simple daily choice: go hungry or get beheaded for the crime of looking at Joffrey from the wrong angle. It was the perfect environment for Joffrey Baratheon, more accurately, Joffrey Lannister, to begin his career as a teenage tyrant. It all started with him sitting on the Iron Throne with a seriousness so stupid it was almost adorable. The crown sat a little too heavy, and if tilted wrong, it poked his forehead. But Joffrey thought he was born to wear it. He sat up straight, feet barely touching the floor, trying to radiate authority. And bizarrely, the harder he tried to look dangerous, the more he resembled a toddler who'd picked up a kitchen knife. On the first morning of his coronation week, Joffrey held a public execution meant to purge the remnants of rebellion. The list of criminal names was as long as a list of things that needed cleaning after a feast at the Red Keep. Anyone with a Stark surname, anyone who ever worked for Ned, anyone who looked slightly annoyed, he threw them all into the chop for convenience queue. The crowd was herded into the square. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the chill from the Iron Throne seeped all the way down the city. Among all the trembling eyes, Joffrey stood there, chin raised, giving orders in a child's voice, pretending to be an adult. "Execute them all. Let them see a king who knows no fear." Sansa stood beside him, her heart tightening like a fist. She forced the dutiful bride smile Cersei had taught her, but inside she trembled like a leaf in winter. Joffrey turned to her, asking with unsettling excitement, "Do you think I handled the traitors bravely?" I believe your grace is very courageous," she whispered. "The perfect answer." Joffrey beamed, gestured to the headsman. Sansa closed her eyes, and the sh-key of the falling blade blended with the people's screams, a horrifying symphony only Westeros could compose. When Tyrion heard about it, he merely sighed. If that boy survives a few more seasons, this world won't need White Walkers for extinction. But Joffrey didn't stop there. Hurting people was to him what bowling was to others: aim, throw, hit whoever. Anytime someone irritated him, he staged a mini torture show in the yard. Even his mother, Cersei, queen of intimidation, couldn't take it anymore and snapped, "Joffrey, you've gone too far." To which he yelled, "I am the king. No one tells me to do less." Everyone in the chamber held their breath. Tyrion raised an eyebrow. "I admire your confidence, nephew, but it'd be wise to keep your head firmly on your shoulders before flexing too hard." Joffrey glared. "You threaten me?" Tyrion smiled gently, the way one soothes a cat with its fur standing up. "I'm not threatening, I'm warning. Very different things, though you're young, you'll understand someday." And Tyrion was right. The older Joffrey got, the more he resembled a dull knife, hurting everything it touched while accomplishing nothing. He summoned prostitutes only to torture them to feel powerful. He made guards beat people for glancing too long at his crown. He wanted everyone to fear him, not realizing that fear among the starving often came bundled with fury, and enough fury could topple whatever sat on the throne. While Joffrey strutted around the castle like a spoiled child who'd never been disciplined, outside the gates, the people began to boil with hunger. They threw stones at the food caravans, then at statues of the gods, because even the gods seemed useless. Tyrion saw the tension clearly, but Joffrey didn't. The boy lived in his own bubble, where everything revolved around his moods. Tyrion, meanwhile, walked the castle from morning till night, listening to every whisper, questioning guards and counting sacks of grain. And each time he heard another Joffrey incident, he sighed deeper, as if swallowing the disappointment whole. He even approached Sansa during dinner, when she was still shaking from the executions. Tyrion looked into her frightened eyes and said softly, "I'm sorry you must endure all this." Sansa was stunned. No one else in the entire palace had ever said such words to her. But Tyrion was different. He was the only one who didn't need to act cruel or powerful to earn respect. Ironically, Joffrey's cruelty pushed many pieces on the Westerosi chessboard into motion. Robb Stark grew more relentless. Stannis grew harder. Renly smiled more to hide his worry. The people of King's Landing whispered behind their king's back. And Cersei, though she'd never admit it, lost sleep because of the child she'd raised. During one council meeting, after Joffrey stormed out because he was bored of adults talking, Tyrion finally said aloud, "We don't have a king. We have a child, and that child is using Westeros as his playground." Cersei frowned. "He is still my son." Tyrion looked at her, voice soft enough to lull someone to sleep. "Yes, and that is exactly the problem." Silence fell. The three older men, Pycelle and Varys Littlefinger, stared at the table. No one dared agree. No one dared disagree. But all understood the truth, and Tyrion knew better than anyone. If he didn't control Joffrey, Joffrey would burn the city. If he didn't restrain Cersei, she'd suffocate what hope remained. And if he didn't act, this war would swallow the entire continent. So when sunset painted King's Landing in gold, Tyrion left the council chamber with steps heavier than they'd been in the morning. He knew that from here on, he wasn't just facing Stannis or starving crowds. He was facing the worst king Westeros had ever produced, a child with a butcher's knife, an iron throne waiting for blood, and one dwarf, trying to save this entire mess with clever insults and a functioning brain. Because in Westeros, sometimes the only thing stronger than brutality is a mind sharp enough to see through it. If Joffrey was the unstable flame of King's Landing, then Sansa Stark was the thin, fragile shadow standing right beside it, always on the verge of being burned, yet ironically, unable to step away. She lived in the palace like a flower, forced to stay fresh in the middle of a drought. Every step, every breath felt like testing the wind to see whether it wanted to lift her or rip her apart today. To outsiders, Sansa was the king's betrothed, a title that sounded glamorous enough to print on a festival banner. But the truth was far darker. She was a high-end hostage, the kind dressed in fine gowns, seated beside the throne, but forbidden the right to live like a human being. Each morning, when sunlight filtered through the gold curtains, Sansa practiced her smile. She knew her smile wasn't meant to show joy. It was meant to hide everything else, longing, fear, anger, and sometimes that quiet despair lying on the stone floor like morning frost. Cersei taught her to use that smile as a shield. "In the court," Cersei said, "whoever shows their feelings dies first." Sansa didn't answer, but inside, she thought, "I've already seen someone die. My father." That pain never left her. It was merely covered by layers of etiquette, and every time she bowed before Joffrey, she heard Ned's voice. Inside her, calm, steady, kind, qualities completely foreign to the throne Joffrey sat on. Joffrey saw Sansa as an expensive accessory to the Iron Throne, pretty, neat, and useful for scaring others when needed. He loved asking her malicious questions in front of the court, just to see how much she'd tremble. One hot afternoon, Joffrey ordered Sansa to stand beside him while he inspected the city. She walked behind him, eyes lowered, breathing lightly as if even air movement might provoke him. As the line of soldiers stretched from the Red Keep through Flea Bottom, Sansa felt the smell of poverty, mud, hunger, and the sharp sting of bitterness. Joffrey, of course, saw something else. He saw subjects looking at him, and he thought they were admiring him. "They love me," he said, confident as someone who just won a village fair raffle. Sansa said nothing, but inside, if she reacted at all, it must have been a sigh long enough to stretch across the sky. Then a stone hit the royal litter, not a big one, but enough to send Joffrey into a frenzy. "Arrest them all!" he screamed, as if the stone were Maegor's spear stabbing his grandfather. "Cut their hands! Hang them! Do everything!" Sansa looked down at the gaunt faces. They weren't rebelling because they hated her. They rebelled because they were starving. And she knew that truth better than anyone, because their fear was the mirror of her own. When Tyrion heard about it, he snorted, "My nephew has the bearing of a king, unfortunately of the worst king history hasn't bothered writing down yet." The atmosphere in the Red Keep grew heavier each day, but in that suffocating air, Sansa had to perform the greatest role of her life, the role of survival. She walked lightly as a cat, spoke carefully as someone inching along a cliff's edge. At every meal, she faced questions that chilled her heart bit by bit. Joffrey interrogating her about loyalty, about love for her king, about her family's betrayal. And each time, Sansa answered with honeyed softness, her words embroidered with silk. But look deeper into her eyes, and you'd see something entirely different. Anger like embers buried under snow. Pain with no safe place to escape. And a tiny spark, not hope for the future, but hope to survive another day. Once, Joffrey ordered her beaten after hearing Robb Stark had won another battle. The guards slapped Sansa until her lip bled, but she stood straight, didn't cry, didn't break. Those watching looked away. They didn't realize the scariest thing wasn't the slap, but Sansa's eyes afterward, silent, unbroken, turning to stone. That was the moment Tyrion appeared, shouting at the guards, scolding Joffrey with logic so brutally accurate it became its own form of mockery. If your grace wishes to be respected, beating an innocent girl isn't the way. If you wish to be hated, by all means continue. Joffrey flushed red, but for once couldn't fire back. A rare moment when a real adult actually shut him up. Afterward, Tyrion sought Sansa out, speaking softly. "I know you're living in a little hell, but you're strong. Don't let them crush you." Sansa bowed her head. She didn't cry, but her brow eased just a little, as if someone had placed a warm hand on her shoulder. And so, Sansa continued walking through the Red Keep, this glittering palace full of invisible blades. She had no sword, no wolf, no family. But she possessed something far rarer in Westeros, the patience of someone quietly learning how to survive inside the belly of a monster. She was a rose torn from the north and stuck into the Lannisters' golden vase. But despite everything, the cruelty of Joffrey, Cersei's inner turmoil, the scrutiny of countless eyes, Sansa still kept the soft core of who she was. That was what the Red Keep hated about her, and that was what kept her from being swallowed whole. Because in a world where everyone chooses to hold a knife, sometimes the one who knows how to bow at the right moment lives the longest. If Sansa was a rose locked inside a golden cage, then Arya was a stone rolling downhill. Once rolling, nothing in this world could make it stop. After Ned's death, Arya didn't just lose her family. She lost her identity. In a twist only Westeros could come up with, a noble girl turned into a nameless child with dirty hair, a smudged face, and a new name, Ari. The name sounded like Arya, except Ari had a better chance of staying alive. Arya didn't cry like a child who'd lost her father. She chose the way children born in war often do, clenching her teeth, hiding a blade in her sleeve, pretending nothing had happened. Her pain didn't appear on her face. It lived in every step she took, in every glance she cast back toward King's Landing, as if she wished she could burn it down to its foundations. But Arya soon learned one truth. Hatred wouldn't get her fed, and identity would never get her through a Lannister checkpoint. So a new life began. The life of a skinny little boy. Cut hair, dirty face, croaky voice. walking with legs wide apart like the boys in Flea Bottom. And her signature survival technique: never look anyone in the eye too long. Smart eyes give you away. But what kept her alive wasn't that she pretended to be a boy. It was that she never pretended to be stupid. Westeros liked obedient children, but those were the ones who died fastest. The road out of King's Landing was nothing like a fairy tale. No birds are singing, no flowers, just dust, mud, sweat, panic, and the smell of people desperately fleeing a city that had witnessed one execution and was about to witness a lot more. Arya traveled north with a group of prisoners, mixed among people arguing about food scraps, sleeping spots, and who got to sit closer to the fire. It didn't take long for her to understand that the world outside castle walls was nothing like the polite lessons taught in Winterfell. Out here, no one said, "Please." They said, "Give it here." No one said thank you. Only, "You're lucky I didn't take all of it." One of the first people she met was Gendry, big, quiet, blunt as a hammer, and someone who took one look at her and said, "You don't look like a boy." Arya felt offended down to her bones. Luckily, Gendry wasn't the nosy type, and so the two of them became the strangest pair in a land built on strangeness. A girl pretending to be a boy, a blacksmith who had no idea he was a king's son, and a silent understanding between two kids the world had been trying to kill since birth. As they traveled farther, Arya learned the price of freedom. Not the poetic kind, but the kind you pay with your stomach, the freedom to eat something that wasn't a pebble. Each day was a lesson. Today, how to hide a needle in your boot. Tomorrow, how to sleep with one eye half open. The next day, how to starve until hunger becomes a roommate. And then came the most important lesson of all, the lesson of fear. One night, Lannister soldiers surrounded the group looking for the blacksmith's bastard son of Robert Baratheon. The pounding hooves, the shouting, the crying, everything sent a chill down Arya's spine. But instead of running like a normal child, she yanked Gendry down and hid both of them beneath the pile of freshly killed bodies. Her face was cold, calm, like someone who'd done this before. In the everyday world, a 10-year-old acting like that would be considered a psychological problem. But in Westeros, that was simply called survival skills. After the soldiers left, Arya finally exhaled, quietly, because breathing too loudly meant admitting you were alive. She looked at Gendry without saying a word. Gendry, usually quiet, became even quieter. But in his eyes, Arya saw something warmer, an acknowledgement that the two of them were now on the same side. In the following days, Arya realized her kill list wasn't getting shorter. It was getting longer. Each night, she whispered the names like a bedtime prayer. Joffrey, Cersei, Island Payne, the one who killed Micah, the one who caused all this. She repeated those names not to gain strength, but to remember why she needed to keep breathing. When they were eventually brought to Harrenhal, Arya saw people being executed for entertainment. Screams mixed with the sound of metal hitting hot iron, the smell of burning flesh, the scent of fear. And through it all, Arya watched silently, waiting. That was when she met Jaqen H'ghar, a man wrapped in mystery like darkness given human form. Just one look at him was enough to think, this one is definitely not normal. When Arya saved Jaqen from burning alive, she unknowingly entered one of the most dangerous contracts of her life. 3 lives repaid for 1 mercy. Those events, Harrenhal, the 3 names, the coldness in Jaqen's eyes, opened the door to a new path, the path of an assassin. But at that moment, Arya only understood one thing. The filthy little boy named Ari was dying, and a new Arya, sharper, darker, was cracking out of her shell. The most ironic part, Arya fled King's Landing to escape violence, but the farther she fled, the more she discovered that Westeros was full of knives. The only difference was that these knives stabbed other people, not her, not yet. And in that chaos, Arya's growth became painfully bittersweet, from a girl who loved dancing around, to someone who lay beneath corpses to survive, from a child who hated doing needlework, to someone practicing killing in her mind. Arya had stepped onto a path no one taught her, but one The entire world around her seemed eager to encourage the path of vengeance. And the farther she wandered from Winterfell, the clearer we could hear it, the cry of a lone wolf in the woods, as if the spirit of House Stark was still calling its lost child home. If, in the south, Joffrey was happily playing teenage tyrant like a kid trying every button on a control panel, then in the north, Robb Stark was living the complete opposite life. No buttons, only mountains of pressure piling on him like snow collapsing a roof no one had time to fix. Robb never asked to be king. But this is Westeros. Since when does anyone get to ask? A group of overheated lords heard about Ned losing his head and immediately roared, "King in the North!" like soccer fans scoring a last-minute goal, and voila, Robb became king. 3 seconds earlier, he had been a 19-year-old boy trying to hold his family together. 3 seconds later, he was the man carrying the harsh climate and stubborn pride of the entire North on his shoulders. What's funny is that Robb was the only person in Westeros trying to be king the proper way, and that, ironically, was the biggest tragedy. Being a decent human being in Westeros meant every faction treated you like a tasty piece of meat ready to be torn apart. Robb won battles quietly. No shouting, no sleeping around, no boasting. A leadership style that said, "I didn't ask for this job, you people forced it on me." Every victory Robb claimed cost Tywin Lannister another hour of sleep and another liter of frustration. Not because Robb was a genius, but because Tywin couldn't stand the idea that the Stark boy kept winning effortlessly while his own brood drove him insane. Jaime got captured like someone taking an unpaid vacation. Tyrion survived using nothing but his mouth. And Joffrey, best not mention him for the sake of Tywin's blood pressure. Robb advanced through territories like a young ghost, quiet, fast, efficient, and always wearing the expression of someone who just wanted things to turn out fine. But war didn't care. Each victory added hundreds of watching eyes. Every decision attracted dozens of nobles examining him like bidders at an auction. Amid the winds of war, Robb met Talisa, a woman who entered his life like a rare warm breeze in the middle of winter. A healer, sharp, strong, with eyes that could make any man holding a sword want to put it down. Her presence reminded Robb for the first time that, beyond killing, there exists something called living like a human being. But that softness was the most dangerous thing. In Westeros, love is like honey, sweet, but once it sticks to your hands, the ants come marching. While Robb struck victory after victory, Catelyn ran from camp to camp, searching for allies: Renly, Stannis, Robb. All of them had one thing in common. Each believed he was king and carried a level of confidence that defied reason. It would be hilarious if it weren't so tragic. Westeros was a place where so many men declared themselves kings that if they ever held a conference called "People Who Think They're King," they'd need to rent a stadium. Catelyn looked at her son with a mixture of pride and fear. She knew he was capable, but she also knew the Stark sense of honor was the most fragile thing on the political chessboard. You can win battles, but can you win hearts? She wondered, words of a mother who understood Westeros more deeply than anyone. Robb kept trying to be the king everyone wanted, a young king who didn't scream, didn't self-glorify, didn't execute people just for fun. But that kindness made him easy prey for those who sought to manipulate him. No one had taught Robb that in Westeros, kindness was like dessert. Everyone enjoyed it, but no one wanted to pay for it. As Robb's victories piled up, Stark soldiers grew confident, but Robb grew quieter. Every step forward on the battlefield was another step away from the peaceful days he never had a chance to appreciate. And the farther he went, the louder the troubled winds blew behind him. Northern lords were honorable, but honorable didn't mean stubborn. Everyone wanted Robb to do things their way. Everyone believed they were right. And Robb stood in the middle, like a debtor being pulled by two creditors, each yanking one arm. He rode across scorched fields, inhaled the bitter scent of war in the wind, sweat sticking to his back, eyes fixed on a distant fog-gray horizon. Winterfell lay far behind, and the path ahead was packed with enemies. His love for Talisa blossomed quietly, like a flower growing between stones, dangerous, fragile, but breathtakingly beautiful. War pushed them closer, but war also made their love feel like a spark hidden beneath an oil-soaked cloth, one flicker away from setting the sky ablaze. In this season of chaos, Robb Stark wasn't merely a young king. He was living proof of Westeros's greatest paradox. A good man may win battles, but he might not win against fate, and fate in Westeros was not known for being kind. If Robb Stark was carrying the entire North on his shoulders, like a young man forced to become a CEO before even graduating, then Catelyn Stark was on an entirely different kind of journey, the journey of a mother facing down the whole world, while her heart was cracking into thin shards like winter ice on a frozen lake. And the irony was this: she always looked calm, but inside she was one breath away from throwing all of Westeros into a fireplace. Catelyn was the kind of person anyone in Westeros should fear, not because she wielded a sword or commanded armies, but because she possessed the deadliest superpower of all, the determination of a mother who had lost her husband, lost her home, and nearly lost all her children. A kind of determination even dragons would step aside for. So when she left Robb to seek alliances, she didn't go like a supplicant. She went like someone perfectly capable of snapping the neck of any lord if it would buy her son one more day of life. To her, Westeros now looked like a chaotic market where everyone was fighting to sell the same battered crown. Renly claimed kingship because he had the biggest army. Stannis claimed it because the law. Joffrey claimed it because he happened to be sitting on the chair at the time. And Robb was made king because a bunch of northern lords got emotional and shouted loud enough. They were all unreasonably confident. And Catelyn, the only person in the entire game who didn't care about power, had to stand in the very center of this spinning wheel of male ambition, like someone trying to untangle fishing lines with trembling hands. When she met Renly Baratheon, she felt like she had met a theater actor rather than a ruler. Renly was handsome, confident, smiling like someone destined to win every beauty pageant if Westeros had such things. But that was exactly the problem. Renly treated the war for the throne like a spring picnic. Sure, he had a massive army, but the spirit of his camp felt more like summer camp. Catelyn watched it all, her heart sinking. This man doesn't understand what war is. While Renly talked about glory and coronations, she could only think of Ned's head falling from the scaffold. They were living in two entirely different worlds. Then there was Stannis, a man so serious that if anyone laughed in the room, he would immediately ask, "What's funny?" Catelyn looked at him as if staring at the human embodiment of a legal document left outside in winter, cold, rigid, and extremely difficult to love. Stannis spoke about succession rights like he was reading a tax bill. No smiles, no softness, only an unshakable belief in his own correctness, a complete opposite of Renly, but equally dangerous. And here was the cruel irony. Both of these men, who had armies, power, and strength, were utterly outmatched by Catelyn in one crucial area, understanding the true cost of war. Renly treated the throne like an ornament. Stannis treated it like an obligation. Only Catelyn saw it for what it really was, a machine built to grind her loved ones into dust. In her conversations with the Baratheon brothers, she spoke words that felt torn from her very blood. "When you fight each other, my son will bleed." The sentence hit both Renly and Stannis hard, but, in typical Westerosi male fashion, they ignored it quickly. Everyone wanted to be king. No one wondered what would be left of the kingdom afterward. When Catelyn left them, she faced her greatest fear again: Robb. She knew her son was brave, but she also knew he hadn't lived long enough to understand that winning battles did not guarantee survival. War wasn't a child's game. A single mistake could wipe out an entire house, and what scared her most wasn't spears or swords, it was her son's heart. Talisa had appeared like a candle in the darkness of war, and Catelyn understood all too well that such light was beautiful, but blinding. She loved her son, but she didn't love this path. She wanted to protect Robb, but the world had shoved her into the role of messenger. Two fires burned inside her, one of loyalty, one of motherhood, and between them, Catelyn Stark stood firm, not out of ambition, not out of pride, but because she had no choice except to fight with what little she had left. On a rare quiet night, when the war winds brushed past the tents, Catelyn looked up at the sky full of stars and remembered Winterfell. The evenings beside Ned when their children were still small, the distant howl of wolves. She knew storms lay ahead, but she also knew this. No matter how the world tried to tear everything apart, her instinct as a mother would rise again and again, holding her family together like her last breath. Catelyn Stark was no warrior, but she was something far more terrifying to Westeros, a mother ready to confront the entire kingdom if she had to. If we're talking about characters whose life journeys involve choosing the wrong turn at every crossroads, then Theon Greyjoy absolutely deserves the top spot. Not because he's cruel like Joffrey or cold like Stannis, but because he's stupid in a very human way, always desperate to prove he belongs somewhere, while no place truly wants him. After the heavy, soul-crushing tension of Catelyn's storyline in Part 7, shifting to Theon feels like watching a tragic drama only for a clown to suddenly walk on stage, except the audience ends up sighing more than laughing. Theon returned to the Iron Islands feeling like a victor. After years living in Winterfell as a high-value hostage, he believed he'd be welcomed home like a prince. But Theon's lifelong tragedy is this. His imagination is always about 2 castles and 3 ships, grander than reality. The moment he stepped off the dock, he realized a painful truth. The Iron Islands didn't remember him and didn't need him. People looked at him the way you look at a well-dressed stranger standing in the wrong house. Then came his reunion with his father, Balon Greyjoy. If there were an award for worst father in Westeros, Balon would be in the top 3 with ease. He didn't look at Theon like a father at his son, but like a merchant evaluating a shipment sent by a rival. Balon didn't need words to insult him. One glance at Theon's fancy fur cloak was enough for him to conclude, this boy has been softened by those Stark people like a fish left drying under the sun. Theon opened his heart, trying to explain how Robb Stark treated him like a brother. But Balon only heard one thing. My son knelt to the north. And for Ironborn, kneeling is an unforgivable humiliation, and thus the Iron Sea delivered its first brutal lesson to Theon. He did not belong where he thought he belonged. Then came Yara Greyjoy, the sister he hadn't seen in years. In their reunion, Theon still managed to produce one of the most high-quality embarrassing moments in Westeros history. But we'll leave the details to your imagination. The important part is this. Yara, strong and sharp like a real warrior, appeared like a mirror showing everything Theon was not. Her confidence shrank him further, pushing him to try harder, but in all the wrong directions. Unfortunately, Theon's biggest effort triggered his biggest disaster, taking Winterfell. It was the move that proved he had the ambition for something big, but absolutely none of the brains to consider the consequences. Conquering Winterfell was as easy as peeling an onion. Few soldiers, Bran still a child, Theon thought he had pulled off a grand achievement. But it was an illusion, like hitting a stationary target and thinking you're a master archer. Worse still, after he took it, he had no idea what to do next. Hold it? Manage it? Negotiate? Build? Reinforce? Everything was a blur. He only knew one thing. He had to act tough, and that's when everything began its downhill slide. The more Theon tried to appear strong, the more he revealed his weakness. When his men didn't respect him, he resorted to violence. When the people didn't obey, he threatened. When someone compared him to Robb Stark, whom he secretly admired but pretended to despise, he panicked. Theon turned Winterfell into a poorly staged theater production where every one of his decisions was soaked in the fear of being called weak. A true ruler leads with authority. Theon ruled with panic. The peak of his stupidity was when he burned 2 innocent children to pretend they were Bran and Rickon, a moment both infuriating and heartbreaking. Theon was not a monster. He was someone so desperate for validation that he drowned himself in sin. And when he put on the mask of a tyrant, everyone could see him trembling. A true villain does not tremble. Theon trembled constantly. By this point, the audience both pitied and hated him. You want to hug him and slap him at the same time. Under the comedic spotlight, Theon is not a villain. He is the most pathetic soul in Westeros. A boy stuck between two worlds, north and iron, wolf and sea, and belonging to neither. His stupidity is the offspring of loneliness, of a stolen childhood, of a desperate craving to be called by one simple title: son. As the sea winds howled, around the rocky cliffs of Pike, Theon Greyjoy walked deeper into his own confusion. He wanted to be Robb's loyal companion, but also Balon's worthy heir. He wanted to be loved, but received only disdain. He wanted to rule himself, but didn't understand what ruling meant. And as his story stepped into its darkest depths, we knew. Theon was entering the icy realm of fate, the realm where people are eroded until they no longer know who they are. Theon Greyjoy is not the most hated character. He is the one who makes people sigh the most, because in a Westeros full of dragons and sorcery, sometimes true tragedy comes from a fragile heart trying too hard to appear strong. After days of northern winds slicing through Robb's camp like the weary sighs of war itself, the story shifts westward to where the taste of salt and the crash of waves against stone have shaped a people as hard as iron, as rough as rock, and as stubborn as a storm at midnight. And in that harsh world, a lost son is returning, Theon Greyjoy, a man who has never known where he truly belongs, but who always tries desperately to act like he has a place in this world. Theon returned to the Iron Islands with the mindset of a victor. He carried the confidence of someone who had just walked out of Robb Stark's string of victories, confident enough to believe his homeland would open its arms to him like a long-lost prince. But the moment he stepped off the dock at Pike, he was hit with a harsh truth. The Iron Islands didn't remember him, and didn't need to. The eyes at the harbor looked at him the way one looks at a stranger wearing clothes far too fine for the damp, salty weather. In Winterfell, he had been the only Greyjoy, but on Pike, he felt like a counterfeit Stark. Then he met his father. Balon Greyjoy did not pat him on the shoulder, did not embrace him, did not say, "I'm glad you're alive." He looked at Theon like a man inspecting damaged goods that had been returned after years in storage. The expensive fox fur cloak on Theon's shoulders made Balon curl his lip, as if he were staring at the death certificate of iron-born spirit hanging around his son's neck. A boy raised on white bread and good northern wine could never understand the iron-born oath. We do not sow. Theon tried to explain, tried to insist that Robb Stark treated him like a brother. But in Balon's ears, the words sounded like a bitter joke. For the Ironborn, kneeling is the greatest shame imaginable. And in his eyes, Theon wasn't a son returning, he was simply a hostage being handed back. Then he met Yara, a name he didn't recognize, a sister he had forgotten, a warrior forged by the sea. Her confidence shattered his fragile pride. Yara rode like a storm, spoke like the crashing surf, and Theon could only stand there, swallowing the embarrassment he'd brought upon himself in their very first reunion. In that moment, he realized he had become an outsider in the one place he desperately wanted to call home. But Theon's pride doesn't give up easily. When Balon talked about a new rebellion, about seizing the North from Robb Stark, something inside Theon flickered. Not ambition, but the desperate hunger to be accepted. So he chose to stand with his father, with the Iron Islands, not out of conviction, but out of a longing to be called son. Taking Winterfell was the shortest-lived triumph in his entire life. It was the easiest victory Westeros had ever seen. No battle, no bloodshed, just knock, and the castle opened. But like a child climbing onto a horse without knowing how to ride it, Theon seized Winterfell without the faintest idea what to do with it. The people feared him not because he was strong, but because he was foolish. His soldiers laughed behind his back. Everyone could see the anxiety twitching beneath his lordly cloak, and from that anxiety, Theon began making mistakes. He believed he had to be cruel to be respected, had to be tyrannical to seem strong. But what he showed was just a boy impatiently forcing himself into the role of a man. And his performance was so bad that it exhausted everyone watching. His greatest mistake, the moment that made all of Westeros exhale in disappointment, it was when he burned 2 innocent children to pass them off as Bran and Rickon. A barbaric act, yet laced with heartbreaking stupidity. Theon didn't kill those children because he was a monster. He did it because he was too weak to admit he had lost control. The torches he lit to flaunt his power couldn't hide the fear in his eyes. A true tyrant does not panic. A truly strong man doesn't need to burn bodies to prove authority. And from that moment on, Theon's fate plummeted. He was betrayed by his own Ironborn, abandoned alone in a burning keep. All the ambition he tried to build scattered like ash on the wind. Theon did not just lose Winterfell. He lost himself, lost his identity, lost respect, lost any path back home, a fragile heart buried beneath the mud of war. That night, as the last flames died on the castle walls, Theon Greyjoy stood stranded in darkness. Winterfell did not belong to him. The Iron Islands did not belong to him. The North did not belong to him. And even he no longer knew where his heart belonged. This is not the tragedy of a traitor. It is the tragedy of a human being who spent his whole life searching for a home, yet knocked on every wrong door. While Winterfell sank deeper into the confusion and foolishness of Theon, like a building handed to the wrong contractor, Bran Stark, the boy who once loved climbing more than eating, was stepping into an entirely different world. No more footsteps running across rooftops. No more laughter echoing in the yard. Now Bran lived as a child confined to a sled, his legs motionless like 2 frozen ribbons of winter. Yet the irony was brutal. Just when Bran's body was imprisoned, his mind began to open wider than anyone could have imagined. Bran sensed everything more sharply after his fall, as though that plunge had closed one door only to unlock countless others. The dreams at first were merely flickers, wolves shifting in the dark, wind slicing through pine trees, the sensation of running with legs that no longer moved. But over time, the dreams grew so vivid they became frightening. In them, Bran did not simply run. He hunted. He did not merely see. He saw through a wolf's eyes. He did not just hear. He listened through the wild instincts beneath a coat of gray fur. In Bran's world, there was a haunting duality. By day, he was a child trapped in the helplessness of a broken body, but by night, he was a creature so free no gust of wind could catch him. Waking, he looked at Hodor, the giant guardian with a gentle heart, the way someone might look at a pair of legs they would never have again. But in his dreams, Bran needed no Hodor. In the dreams, he was the self he had lost. The magic of the North never arrives loudly. It does not fall from the sky like the neon flare of wildfire, nor scream like Stannis' army. It moves quietly, like snow settling on stone. And Bran was the first Stark child in generations to feel it with an intensity that made the skin crawl. Voices calling from deep forests, glimmers between tree trunks. Even strange messages he could not tell were inventions of his mind or whispers from the land itself. In occupied Winterfell, Bran became something Theon had no idea how to handle. Not a threat, not a useful hostage, but a small spark of something far larger. And because Theon was too consumed by his own mistakes and insecurities, Bran gained the rarest gift in a conquered stronghold: silence, space to grow in a way no one expected. With Osha, Rickon, and Hodor, Bran began his escape from Winterfell under the cover of darkness, one of the Stark family's saddest exoduses. No escort, no trumpets, no honor. Only the quiet heartbreak of children fleeing the very home that should have been protected by someone who once called them kin. And if Bran were still the boy of last season, he would have cried. But Bran now was a child of dreams, of strange signs, of whispers from the north. He did not cry. He listened. On nights in the forest, when the campfire had dwindled to embers and the sky was black as ink, Bran dreamed again. The farther he traveled from Winterfell, the sharper the dreams became. The wolf ran faster. Hunted better, its wild freedom flowing through Bran's veins. Sometimes he woke with ragged breaths, as though he had sprinted through the entire forest. Hodor and Osha watched him with a mix of worry and reverence, as if they were caring for someone far greater than they had imagined. No one spoke of it, but all felt it. Something was touching Bran, calling him in a single, undeniable direction, the far north, where the wall stood like a cold scar of history. In that suffocating stillness, Bran began to understand his own meaning. He was not the boy who fell from the tower, not the crippled son of House Stark. He was becoming something Westeros itself was not yet ready to name. A door opening, like a draft of cold slipping through old wood. A sign that his story would not end with the wars of men, but with secrets darker, older, waiting beneath ice and within endless dreams. Bran Stark lost the ability to walk, but in return, he was traveling farther than any Stark ever had, not across the ground, but into the silent, ancient history of the North. Home, a fragile heart buried under the mud of war. That night, as the last flames died along the castle walls, Theon Greyjoy stood stranded in the darkness. Winterfell wasn't his, the Iron Islands weren't his, the North wasn't his, and even he no longer knew where his heart belonged. This was not the tragedy of a traitor. This was the tragedy of a man who spent his entire life searching for a home, yet knocked on every wrong door. On the far side of the wall, where the wind blows hard enough to shred whatever confidence a man has left, Jon Snow is stepping into a new chapter of his life. A chapter that, had he been able to see ahead, he probably would have withdrawn his Night's Watch application and gone back to Winterfell to raise snow puppies. But life is like that. The ones who don't know what they truly want are always thrown into the places most likely to confuse them. Beyond the cold shadow of the wall, Jon begins to realize that the stories he heard in Winterfell about the Wildlings were the kiddie version. The world out here isn't made of names in a book. It's made of winds sharp enough to cut breath short, snow thick as a blanket no one ever washes, and people who live more by instinct than law. To them, freedom isn't philosophy. Freedom is breathing. Jon walks with Qhorin Halfhand, one of the last battle-hardened warriors left in the Night's Watch. Qhorin's authority isn't in what he says, but in the kind of eyes that have seen enough corpses to be allergic to human arrogance. But even Qhorin doesn't prepare Jon for one thing: Ygritte. Meeting Ygritte is like nature slapping you with an icy hand. She's not like the girls Jon has known, not soft like Sansa, not mischievous like Arya, and definitely nothing like the women from the Watch's campfire tales. Ygritte is snow, is stone, is fire hidden in fox fur. And what unsettles Jon isn't her wild beauty, it's her fearless, wicked sense of humor. The kind of confidence that, if brought to Winterfell, Bran would probably record as legend. When Jon captures Ygritte, he thinks he's accomplished something big. But Ygritte quickly teaches him a harsh truth. Being captured isn't the most humiliating part. The real humiliation is letting your prisoner tease you until your face burns under the snow. And Ygritte does it masterfully. No one has ever rattled Jon Snow this much, not with a sword, but with a single sharp line. You know nothing. A sentence simple enough to stun him, and deep down, Jon knows she's not wrong. Night falls heavy with snow, and the wildlings melt into the dark. The flickering firelight catches Ygritte's face just right, making Jon wary and curious all at once. In the far north, where death waits behind every rock, two young people talking is already a luxury. But in that moment, Jon learns something important. Some battles aren't fought with weapons, but with looks and words, and in that battle, he loses badly. When Ygritte slips from Jon's grasp and escapes, he officially steps into a swamp of impossible choices. He doesn't kill her out of compassion, doesn't hold her out of duty. He does the hardest thing. He lets her go. An act noble enough to make Qhorin frown, reckless enough to make the Night's Watch question him, and charming enough to make Ygritte look at him like he's an adorable idiot. When Jon is led to the Wildling camp, he learns something no Meister's book could ever teach. Freedom isn't something to fight for. It's something people are born with. The wildlings have no castles, no courts, no southern gloom. They live simply. They want something, they do it. And that simplicity makes them more frightening than any army. Jon watches their makeshift settlements, hears their laughter echo even with frost piling on their tents. A small door opens in his mind. Maybe everything he learned growing up wasn't the whole truth. Who is truly free? The black-clad men who swear away their lives, or those who dare live and die on their own terms? But when night deepens and snow falls harder, Jon realizes something more terrifying than freedom, or war, or Ygritte's razor-sharp teasing. Shapes moving at the edge of the firelight, eyes glowing blue, footsteps too wrong to belong to the living. The stories about the White Walkers, bedtime legends for the past century, they are beginning to show their real shape. An ancient nightmare is waking. And there, at the very edge of the world's breath, Jon Snow, once just a boy afraid his father didn't love him enough, now faces a truth far larger than anything he imagined. The wars of men are nothing but petty arguments in the garden. The true threat is coming, silent as ice, endless as the northern night. Ygritte once told him he knew nothing, and maybe she was right. But from that moment on, Jon Snow begins to learn. The way is that only those who survive truly learn. In the South, when people talk about fear, they often think of war, politics, or the occasional spoiled prince such as Joffrey. But in the North, where the pine trees stand still like grave watchers, fear takes a different shape. It doesn't speak, it doesn't breathe, and it doesn't know what death means. That is why the Night's Watch exists, and also why they always feel wrong. The moment they step too far beyond the wall. If they had a slogan, it would probably be, Night's Watch, facing things no salary is worth. After breaking off from the primary host, Jon and Qhorin's group continue moving deeper into the blank patches on Westerosi maps, the places cartographers marked with a few lazy white smudges. The wind here blows hard enough to peel your face off, making every man wonder why he chose this job instead of becoming a cozy blacksmith warming his hands by a fire. Around them, silence hangs as thick as snow, not the peaceful kind, the kind that feels like someone holding their breath, waiting for you to make a mistake. Then they find it. A Night's Watch camp, abandoned. No corpses, no survivors, just collapsed tents, scattered footprints, and the eerie feeling that everything was packed up in a rush, like a feast, where the host suddenly remembered rent was due. Qhorin looks around with the eyes of someone who's seen too many disasters to still be surprised, yet he lets out a sigh filled with pure exhaustion. Another lovely northern night. No blood, no drag marks, nothing to investigate, which, by Night's Watch logic, is the most terrifying thing of all. Because at least when there's blood, you know who the enemy is. When there's nothing, it means the enemy wants you to think there's nothing. As usual, when tension peaks, the group hears a strange clattering from a corner of the woods, a sound so faint it could be accidental, but just loud enough for everyone to draw their swords. Instead of a monster, they find something that almost lets them breathe again. A blackened, frozen hand. It looks like someone dropped a glove and came back to pick it up, except the fingers are still attached. One of the younger rangers whispers, "Hopefully this is just a prank from the wind." Qhorin replies, "Wind doesn't joke here." Everyone falls silent. Because it's true, northern wind has absolutely no sense of humor. Soon they realize the hand isn't the only thing wrong. There are signs, there are tracks, and there is that unnatural silence. When night falls, they hear something that doesn't belong to the living. A dry, soft, rhythmic sound, like claws dragging lightly against stone. No one says it aloud, but everyone knows what's coming. When the first shadow slips between the trees, Jon Snow feels a chill deeper than the snow itself. A tall shape, moving as softly as mist. Its eyes glow blue, not the blue of flame, nor sky, but the blue of death, sharpened into a blade. Two more shapes appear behind it. Every tale Jon heard about the White Walkers becomes real, and very, very inconvenient. In that moment, everyone understands one thing. Men can fight over thrones for 100 years, but out here, the only thing that decides who lives or dies is how fast can you run? Which is a problem, because the snow is knee-deep. The funny part is, while Qhorin draws his sword like a seasoned warrior and the others brace for battle, Jon has one single thought. Wish Ygritte were here to say something ridiculous so I'd be less scared. A very Jon Snow kind of fear. Sincere and slightly embarrassing. The White Walkers do not strike immediately. They just stare, as if evaluating whether the Night's Watch is even worth the effort. This, sadly, makes everyone feel insulted. Being deemed not interesting enough to kill by a monster is a humiliation few forget. Then, one shadow lunges, fast as a wolf pouncing in the dark, and the fight erupts. Steel clashes with a shriek, then goes eerily quiet as if swallowed. Jon stabs with his ordinary sword, only to realize it does nothing but make the creature look at him longer. Luckily, Qhorin shouts, "Fire!" And he's right. Only fire makes the White Walkers recoil, as if it's the one thing in this frozen world they cannot bear. After they escape, Jon isn't sure if he survived through instinct or sheer luck. He only knows this. What lives out here is not a fireside tale, not a legend, not a bedtime scare. It's the thing that will sweep over the wall if mankind doesn't wake up, and Westeros is famously a place where no one wakes up to anything. In the darkness where snow never stops falling, Jon Snow finally understands the bitter truth. The wall wasn't built to stop wildlings. It was built to stop something that is waking. And if what he just saw is only the early warning, then the rest of this story will not be easy to sleep through, even when told in a soothing voice. After a night filled with the smell of snow, the groan of metal, and blue glowing shadows, the story leaves the north and carries us somewhere warmer, or rather, hot in that very specific something's burning inside your soul kind of way. This is Dragonstone, once home to dragon lords, now nothing more than a silent black rock and a man so grim that even the stones around him fear cracking, just so they won't disturb him. Stannis Baratheon. One of the rare men in Westeros capable of turning a crowded room into dead silence just by standing there. Not because of royal grandeur nor divine aura, but simply because everyone is terrified he might get annoyed. Stannis isn't the type who gets angry. He's the type who naturally looks like he's already angry, even while eating breakfast. Stannis is Robert Baratheon's older brother, yet he has neither Robert's bull-like strength nor Renly's easy charm. He has something else, a mountain-hard stubbornness and an unshakable belief that right is right, wrong is wrong. A noble quality, until you apply it to Westerosi politics, where black and white blur together like sea mist at night. After Robert's death, Stannis declared himself the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. No feasts, no trumpets, no flair. He simply said, "I am the king," in the same tone one might use to read a tax bill. And, just like a tax bill, no one wanted to listen. Renly scoffed. Cersei ignored him. Joffrey was busy tormenting citizens. Robb was busy being king in the north. Dany was across the sea with dragons. Only one person truly paid attention to him, Melisandre. On Dragonstone, the sea wind moans through stone steps like a long sigh. Even sunlight seems tired here. But in Stannis' chamber, there is always another kind of light. The red glow of the flames Melisandre adores with near fanatic devotion. She's a priestess of Ar-Helor, a god who feels respected only when something is burning. Melisandre is the kind of person who the moment she enters a room makes you think, something spiritual and concerning is about to happen. She is beautiful, but in a dangerous way, like a lullaby that ends with a gong crash. She believes Stannis is the chosen one. And Stannis, though he cares little for destiny, is pragmatic enough to realize when the whole world is full of enemies, anyone offering magic is worth hearing out. Ironically, what makes Stannis almost comical is his seriousness. He treats life like a to-do list where every item is marked urgent. When Melisandre speaks about light, destiny, and foretold victory, Stannis doesn't grow poetic like Renly. He simply nods. If it works, I'll use it. A very managerial approach. One evening, as red firelight flickered against the walls, Melisandre told him that the path to the Iron Throne required more than swords, prayer, choice, and sacrifice. From the way she pronounced the word sacrifice, anyone could tell she didn't mean skipping meals. She meant sleepless nights and ominous supernatural consequences. Davos, the only sane man in the room, opposed her fiercely. He didn't believe in magic, didn't believe in gods, didn't believe in Melisandre. But he did believe in Stannis, because he knew Stannis was fair to the point of being painfully literal, the kind of man who would cut off half your finger for breaking the law and still make you his most trusted friend afterward. Davos is living proof. The problem was, Stannis' harsh sense of justice wasn't enough to win a game where every other player cheated harder than a rigged gambling den. He had no Lannister gold, no northern armies, no Renly charisma. What he had was relentless endurance, and Melisandre believed that was enough. Then she made a suggestion only she could make. You need an heir. An heir in the very Melisandre sense, which is not what normal people mean. That night Dragonstone fell eerily silent, as if even the waves feared disturbing something forbidden. Red candles flickered, and in their glow, Stannis revealed something rare, that he too was human, with desires, doubts, and a mind susceptible to the lure of the mystical. Melisandre leaned close, whispering like sea wind. A child of shadow can eliminate those who stand in your way. A sentence that, if spoken in the South, would probably be mistaken for a campfire ghost story. Stannis said nothing, but his silence was the answer. From this strange union, Stannis' uncompromising rigidity and Melisandre's blazing mysticism, something very Westeros was born, a being neither of shadow nor of light, but walking the line between both, a shape of darkness given form, a killer only Westeros could call a practical solution. No matter how people retell that night, as a ghost tale, a romance, or a political maneuver, the truth is simple. It marked the beginning of a death already on its way. A death named Renly, the man with the best hair, the brightest smile, but lacking the one thing Stannis now had, a shadow that walks. On Dragonstone, the fire crackled like a heartbeat, and in the long sigh of the sea wind, Stannis stepped one pace further down a path from which he could no longer return, a path leading straight into war, sorcery, and decisions that sound sleepy when narrated, but terrifying when truly considered. Nights at Dragonstone are rarely peaceful. The sea wind always carries an endless hiss, as if the waves still remember the dragons that once flew above this place. But tonight, after Stannis nodded to Melisandre and her promise of belonging to the light, the air feels thicker, heavier, and so silent that even the wind seems worried it might be rude if it blows too loudly. Stannis is left to prepare for his path toward reclaiming the Iron Throne, wearing that signature expression of his. I'm not happy about this, but I still have to do it. Meanwhile, Melisandre moves quietly through the darkness, her red cloak dragging over the black stone like a streak of fire searching for direction. Every step she takes makes the torches flicker, as though the very walls are trying to lean away from her. Davos follows behind, not because he wants to, but because he's been forced to. His mind is tangled, the way a man's mind feels when he only wants to fish, but is dragged into an advanced seminar on applied divine mysticism. He doesn't believe in magic, doesn't believe in Arheller, doesn't believe in Melisandre's flame-colored prophecies. But he believes in Stannis, enough to walk into a place any sensible man would avoid. A small boat carries the two of them toward a cave hidden beneath jagged cliffs. The water is black as ink, the waves thumping against rock in a rhythm both soothing and terrifying, like someone whispering in his ear. Do not go in there. Davos has slipped through countless dark places in his years as a smuggler, but no cave has ever made his skin crawl like this one. He could swear even the sea is afraid of Melisandre. When the boat reaches the slick rock, Melisandre steps out as if she's belonged there since the dawn of time. Her red shadow trails across the stone, steady, unmoving, not bending or jittering like a normal shadow. It separates from her body for a half a second, very slight, very quick, but enough for Davos to realize he has crossed into the borderland between myth and nightmare. "We shouldn't be doing this," Davos says, his voice rough with salt and dread. He doesn't bother adding because it's wrong or because it's terrifying. Those words are far too soft for what he means. Melisandre turns, her eyes glowing like embers beneath ash. "If we do not," she says slowly, "Stannis will lose, and this land will fall into a darker shadow, one without a guiding light." It sounds like a piece of philosophical lullaby, but in truth, it makes Davos want to jump straight into the freezing water. Still, he follows, for one reason only. Stannis needs him alive to keep some form of rightness intact. And this is certainly not rightness. The cave is deep and suffocating, its dampness clinging to the skin. Droplets fall in a steady, slow rhythm, like some unseen thing is counting. Melisandre walks ahead, her torch blazing so brightly that Davos's shadow shivers as if it's scared. Then she stops. At the end of the cave is an open chamber. No wind, no sound, no life, and more frighteningly, no death either, only waiting. Melisandre turns her back to Davos. "Watch," she says. Davos is a man who has seen war, hunger, and loss. He's not easily shaken. But what happens next drains the color from his face like a man encountering a ghost, because he's seeing something worse. Melisandre loosens her cloak and lets it fall. Not to be alluring or dramatic, she cares nothing for such mortal theatrics. What she does is more like an ancient ritual, solemn, emotionless, and so cold that even the stone seems to shrink away. Her body glows with the warmth of living fire, but the air around her suddenly darkens, as if something behind her is swallowing the light. Then she sinks to her knees. Not in pain, not in fear, but like someone performing a task she has rehearsed 1,000 times in dreams. Her belly swells, not in any natural rhythm, but in a manner that whispers, "This does not belong to the world of men." Davos gulps, fingers whitening around his dagger. Cold sweat trickles down his spine, and over several breaths that feel like centuries, Melisandre births a creature of shadow, a thick black silhouette shaped like a man, but with no eyes, no mouth, moving like water running backward. It crawls out of her like a massive serpent sculpted from midnight. Davos gasps, heart pounding as though trying to escape before his body can. The shadow rises. Its form is hazy, but unmistakably resembles Stannis. If Stannis is a man, then this is his version stripped of everything human. No morality, no sleep, no reason. Melisandre, sweat glistening like worn-down light on her skin, simply watches and says, "The light will prevail." The shadow does not answer. It glides past Davos, not running, but dissolving into the air and gathering again ahead of them. He feels a cold wind slice through him as it passes, even though there is no wind at all. Then, the shadow disappears deeper into the cave, on its way to kill. Another king. Davos remains there for a long time, as if trapped in a nightmare no one dares wake him from. He understands one thing. Tonight, Stannis has lost something more important than his soul. He has lost the path back. Dawn in Renly's camp is usually the most pleasant moment anywhere in the realm. Golden sunlight, flags fluttering, polished armor gleaming, elite soldiers eating breakfast under the smile of their young king, the man who could stand still and still look better than half the paintings in every castle. Renly's supporters always boasted, "Whatever happens, at least our leader knows how to comb his hair." But this morning is different. The air is heavier, the wind feels strange, and even the sun seems hesitant. It rises, but reluctantly, as if it doesn't want to witness the absurd thing about to happen inside the grandest tent in the camp. Renly Baratheon, the man so confident he believed he could defeat both Stannis and Joffrey with nothing but his dazzling smile, is preparing to meet with Catelyn and Brienne. Last night, all plans were smooth as silk, Largest army, strongest alliances, sky-high morale. If the war for the Iron Throne were a beauty pageant, Renly would have taken the crown in the opening round. But tragedy in Westeros loves targeting the beautiful, especially those who think beauty is armor. Brienne stands beside him, tall as a walking tower, her gaze unwavering with loyalty. Catelyn looks like someone who has lived through so much tragedy that she wakes up every morning wondering, so, who dies today? Yet still carries herself with dignity. The tent is quiet. Too quiet. Renly is saying something very Renly. I'll show Stannis who the true Baratheon is. He has his laws, I have my smile. To be fair, if war were fought through sheer charisma, Renly would be undefeated. Unfortunately, armies do not operate on charm points. A soft breeze slips into the tent. A candle flickers. Brienne frowns. Fighters always sense when something doesn't belong to their world. A shadow crawls across the floor. Not a human shadow. Not the shape of any creature Brienne has ever encountered. It glides like water, yet carries the faint outline of an adult man. Catelyn steps back, exhaling sharply. She has seen many strange things, but nothing with the specific aura of this left bloodstains in someone's dream last night. Renly turns, still smiling. He thinks it's a joke, a prank by some soldier wrapped in a cloak. But then the shadow rises fully, its shape stabilizing, and its face, if one could call it a face, forms into something disturbingly familiar. It looks like Stannis. So alike that if you placed them side by side, the only difference would be that this shadow has no morals, no eyes, and no patience. Renly opens his mouth to say something like, "Who allowed you into my tent?" But the words never form. The shadow lunges, swift as fire licking dry wood. Brienne shouts. Renly barely manages to lift a shield hand, just barely, before the shadow drives through his chest like a knife sinking into warm butter. No thunderclap, no blinding flash, no dragons, no screams, no armies collapsing. Only Renly's soft, startled exhale, like someone who lost his breath after laughing too hard the night before. Then he falls, eyes wide open in astonishment, as if thinking, "What just happened? I haven't even finished my hair." Brienne roars, charging like a storm, swinging her blade. But the steel slices through nothing but icy emptiness. The shadow dissolves, thinning like steam, then fading entirely as though it had never existed. The tent remains filled only with the harsh breaths of Brienne and Catelyn. One has lost her king. The other, her last strand of hope. Both understand instantly. This is not a death explainable by sword or law or cleverness. This is a death born of ambition, in the literal sense. Brienne drops to her knees, gathering Renly's lifeless body. Her grief makes no sound, yet it weighs like stone. The tent feels as if it shrinks around them, leaving only the ragged breathing of a woman who has just seen the only person who ever treated her with true respect die before her eyes. Catelyn places a hand on Brienne's shoulder and whispers, "We must leave. Immediately." A reasonable warning. Because if Renly soldiers see this scene, Brienne, the most loyal of them all, beside the dead king with sweat still on her blade, then the logic of Westeros will instantly conclude, she must have killed him. And so the downfall of a kingdom ends in the saddest way possible. The most beautiful man in the realm dies without leaving any lesson behind, except perhaps this one. If your older brother is Stannis, don't sleep with your tent flap open. If Westeros is drowning in chaos, fire, and kings dying faster than moss grows on graves, then across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen is stepping into a completely different world, a world where sunlight strikes enormous gates and wealth is displayed so extravagantly you can see the true nature of people the moment they bow. Qarth unfolds before her as a magnificent painting colored a bit too enthusiastically. Marble walls, ornate doors, crowds draped in silver-threaded fabrics, speaking in voices that sound as if they've swallowed an entire jewelry collection. To any traveler, Qarth might seem like the gateway to heaven. But for Dany, a girl who has fled for her life, lived in deserts and carried 3 baby dragons that still chirped like newborn chicks. Heaven was always the most suspicious place, because any paradise that welcomes you too warmly usually isn't paradise. It's a showroom. Zaro Sean Daxos, the first to greet her, smiles as if he has just spotted a walking gold mine. He spreads his arms wide. "Welcome, Mother of Dragons, to Korth." His voice is so sweet that if you poured it into a glass, it could be used as syrup. But his eyes are cold as stone, the kind of cold belonging to a man, calculating exactly how much you're worth in the night market. Dany enters Korth with Jorah, her bodyguard, her advisor, the man whose feelings run deep like fortified walls but who never dares speak them. Jorah glances around, his seasoned instincts speaking before his lips. Beautiful, which means dangerous. Brilliant gardens, turquoise silk flowing in the wind, fountain after fountain that seems to spit out money rather than water. But behind all that elegance lies a scent Dany recognizes clearly. The scent of pretense. Korth is the kind of place where everyone smiles, but no one shows their real teeth. The moment Daenerys steps into the grand hall, merchants, nobles, and warlocks swarm her as quickly as sharks when blood hits the water. They bow, shower her with flowery compliments, and say things like, "Our city would be honored to accompany the queen. You are the new light of the world. We can help you return to Westeros." Of course, every sentence comes with a silent clause. As long as you pay something very, very big. Daenerys smiles warily. She has been sold by her brother like a horse. She has been deceived by merchants. She has seen sweet promises turn into fire and blood. So now, even with 3 baby dragons perched on her shoulders, warm as little coal furnaces, she knows one thing. This is a place where dragons can be caged, bought, or displayed like trophies. Then come the warlocks of the House of the Undying, men with pale faces, bright eyes, and voices soft as desert wind. They invite Dany to their tower where ancient knowledge awaits. Sounds intriguing, but any knowledge delivered with a malnourished stare is rarely the kind that helps you live long. Jorah doesn't even hide his disgust. He looks at them as if they were snakes wearing crowns. "Do not trust them, Khaleesi." His voice is low, slow, but firm as a curse. Meanwhile, another danger is growing behind the scenes, Korth's unrestrained curiosity about dragons. Dany's 3 little dragons, though only capable of flying a few feet, are political weapons of immense power. In Westeros, dragonfire once reshaped continents. In Korth, people look at dragons as if they're calculating their weight in gold. Daenerys feels those eyes, one by one, eyes of ambition, fear, and greed. Some smile at her, but their gaze drifts toward the dragons as if converting them into coin. Then the inevitable happens. The dragons are stolen. Not by a hungry thief, but by men who believe they have the right to control the fate of the world, the warlocks of Korth. A seemingly quiet afternoon, gentle wind, golden sunlight, and the dragons vanish from her chamber. Daenerys stands in the Qarth sunset, her eyes blazing hotter than Drogon, her voice dropping as a whetstone dragged across steel. "They will pay." In that moment, everyone who once sneered behind her back is reminded of something they foolishly forgot. The most dangerous nerve in the world isn't magic. It's motherhood. Daenerys begins her search, eyes sharp, steps decisive, each movement like a freshly forged blade. Every beautiful flower in Korth becomes sinister. Every smile becomes deceitful. The city is no longer splendid. It is a gilded cage holding an angry dragon. The House of the Undying, with its bone-white architecture and tomb-like silence, suddenly becomes the center of everything. And that is where Daenerys walks toward, not with curiosity, but with fire running in her veins. And the thing Korth thought it controlled is exactly what will burn it to the ground. If Korth is a city of gilded beauty with poisonous undertones, then the Lannister war camp in the Riverlands is a place where power smells, unmistakably like family. No festivals, no glittering marble, just red tents, horsehide, and the kind of arguments you can hear from 3 miles away. The Lannisters are having another family meeting. Tyrion arrives as the youngest child with an IQ higher than the entire camp combined and finds Tywin, a father whose every sentence feels like an arrow aimed straight at the listener's dignity. Tywin sits there, red and black armor polished, his face set like carved stone. He's eating meat methodically, but in a way that makes the meat look like it represents someone he wants dead. And it doesn't take long before he starts handling Tyrion, before Tyrion even reaches his chair. "You're late," Tywin says lightly, as if reporting the weather, except this weather's a Category 12 storm. Tyrion shrugs. "I was busy saving King's Landing from the disaster your grandson caused." Tywin doesn't bother looking up. "The boy is king." "Yes," Tyrion replies, "a king capable of turning any peaceful dinner into a surprise execution." The air thickens. Jaime is also present, sharpening his sword and pretending he's just overhearing the conversation by accident, when in fact he's hanging on to every word. Because if anyone knows the venom of Tyrion's tongue and the iron rule of Tywin, it's Jaime. Tywin sets his knife down. "Tyrion, you believe yourself clever, but cleverness without restraint is no different from stupidity with confidence." Tyrion props his elbows on the table, offering a smile thin as a blade. "Fortunately, Father always knows how to make me feel. Not entirely useless." Jaime lets out a tiny laugh. Mistake. Tywin glances at him. Just one glance, but it freezes the entire tent. Jaime falls silent instantly, as if he never had vocal cords. Tywin continues. "You left me a ruined court. Joffrey is out of control. Cersei is antagonizing half the capital, and you pour wine and mock everyone." Tyrion shrugs again. "Without me, the city would have been roasted by Stannis' wildfire." "Do you know how wildfire explodes? Like Joffrey's temper when denied dessert." Jaime bites his lip to keep from laughing. Tywin does not. He leans back, eyes fixed on Tyrion, like he's a faulty item he's forced to use for lack of alternatives. "Tyrion," Tywin says, "there are times when I wish you were not my son." He says it casually, but every word lands like molten lead. Tyrion stays silent for a moment. The smile disappears. "Father," he says quietly, "that's something I've heard my entire life. I'm only surprised you said it today with such tenderness." For a brief second, the camp holds its breath. Tywin, a man who believes emotions are unnecessary accessories, stares at Tyrion a moment longer than usual, as if realizing that the child he considers a burden is the only one actually holding the family together with his mind. It lasts exactly 3 seconds. Tywin turns to Jaime. "And you, once this battle is over, you will leave camp and return to King's Landing. I cannot allow Cersei and Joffrey to do as they please." Jaime arches an eyebrow. "You don't think I belong on the battlefield?" Tywin replies, "No, you belong at home, to keep your nephew from becoming a younger, uglier-haired version of Arya." Tyrion snorts. Tywin glances at him. Tyrion stops. The meeting continues with a long lecture, the signature Lannister sermon, about honor, which they don't really have, about loyalty, which they use mostly to control one another, and about the family legacy, which is currently trending toward incest, debt, and general collapse. Tyrion finally cuts in. "So what is Father's ultimate goal? Keeping the Lannisters powerful?" Tywin sighs as though Tyrion has asked the stupidest question imaginable. "My goal, Tyrion, is to keep this family from tearing itself apart through the stupidity of its own members." A beat of silence. Tyrion asks, "Whom are you referring to?" Tywin answers without blinking, "All of you." Jaime snorts. Tyrion looks at Jaime. Jaime looks at his golden hand. Indeed, this is a family where every single member is a potential threat to world stability in their own special way. The meeting ends with Tywin's classic decree. "I want both of you back in King's Landing. Our house requires someone with a functioning mind." Tyrion nods. "You actually want me there?" Tywin replies, "No, but I need someone to keep the court from collapsing, and you, as much as I loathe admitting it, or the best option. There it is. The only compliment Tyrion will ever receive from his father, delivered in a voice like Tywin is being forced to swallow bitter medicine. As Tyrion and Jaime leave the tent, Tyrion murmurs, "Did you notice? Father just complimented me." Jaime answers, "Yes, and I've never seen him look so tired." Tyrion smirks. That's what capable children do. King's Landing had never been peaceful, but that night it was so chaotic that if you stood on the city walls, you might think you'd stumbled into a summer festival, except the fireworks were green, 10 times louder, and instead of cheers, you heard people screaming until their throats burned. Stannis Baratheon marched in like a storm that didn't bother with background music or unnecessary dialogue. The man treated the conquest of the Iron Throne with such solemnity that the last smile on his face had probably gone extinct before the dinosaurs. He didn't speak much. He simply observed the city with the expression of a schoolmaster looking at his class and preparing to hand out a test that wasn't new but was certainly difficult. Meanwhile, King's Landing was operating like a parent-teacher conference where every parent wanted to punch someone. Joffrey ran around like a half-feathered rooster, screaming, waving a sword, barking random orders. Cersei drank so much wine that the Red Keep could have used her breath to light torches. Loras was absent, and Tywin was far away, which meant the only person still sane enough to care about strategy was Tyrion, a man not even tall enough to reach a guardsman's shoulder, yet with a mind sharper than the entire court combined. The dwarf stepped before the soldiers with a deep, clear voice, no panic at all. He knew that if Stannis breached the gates, by morning there would be no homes, no people, and no wine left to drink in King's Landing. So he chose the only thing Westeros truly feared: wildfire. That glowing green explosive was brewed by pyromancers whose hobbies included blowing up their own workshops at least once a week. Tyrion looked at the vats of wildfire, the green light washing over his face, and smiled as if he'd just figured out how to unplug a hyperactive child. When Stannis' ships entered Blackwater Bay, everyone tensed like bowstrings. Only Tyrion, standing on the battlements, whispered, "Burn it." The wildfire ship drifted calmly across the water, so gently you'd think nothing was unusual about it, and then, boom. The explosion turned the whole sky into a brilliant emerald, glowing like thousands of fireflies detonating at once. Flames rose high, spiraling, folding into themselves, and devoured Stannis' fleet. Waves slapped against the walls, carrying the eerie green reflection back onto the faces of the soldiers. It was beautiful, the kind of beauty that, if you didn't know it was killing people, you might mistake for the grandest fireworks show ever held. But Stannis did not retreat. The man was so relentless that if a mountain stood in his way, he would walk straight into it. His troops landed on the shore, raised ladders, and stormed the gates. King's Landing soldiers trembled so hard, the ladders shook before they even touched the walls. And Joffrey, after shouting a few heroic lines for show, promptly ran back to the Red Keep because Cersei told him, "You must protect your mother." Yes, so the entire army exchanged looks that clearly said, "Our king just went home. So why exactly are we still fighting?" Which was when Tyrion had to step in. He rode ahead of the troops, sword in hand, voice dripping with sarcasm but somehow steadier than any commander there. "You may die, yes, but dying here is better than living long enough to endure more of Joffrey's rule." The soldiers went silent for 5 full seconds. Then they nodded. Tyrion led the charge. Yes, led. A man barely half the height of a shield, riding into battle before everyone else. It was both ridiculous and moving, like watching a kitten decide to brawl with a pack of dogs. And then he actually fought. His sword was small but sharp, his arms not strong but quick. Tyrion slashed, parried, and weaved through soldiers like flowing water. He wasn't a warrior, but he was smart. And sometimes intelligence beats muscle. But every victory in Westeros comes with a cheap shot. Sir Mandon Moore, a Kingsguard knight, suddenly turned his blade on Tyrion. No warning, no shout, just one swift, clean stroke of pure betrayal. The steel cut down Tyrion's face, blood spraying as he fell. For a heartbeat, the battlefield fell silent. Green fire reflected off the streak of blood on the ground, and Tyrion, who had just saved the entire city, nearly died from a treacherous stab delivered by his own side. Bran rushed in. Steel clashed loudly. Sir Mandon was killed. Tyrion was dragged away, his vision blurred. Screams, flames, water crashing, boots pounding, all blended together like a soft, sickening nightmare. When Tyrion finally opened his eyes, the battle was nearly over. Tywin had returned, saving King's Landing at the last possible moment as a giant punctuation mark slammed onto a chaotic page. But amid all the cheering, Tyrion felt only one truth. He had won the battle, saved the entire city, and was still forgotten. No thanks, no greetings, no flowers, no wine. Only a fresh scar on his face, a reminder that in Westeros even heroes can be kicked aside like unwanted furniture. While outside the walls the green flames were still roaring as if determined to burn straight through Blackwater Bay, inside the Red Keep was a different world entirely, silent, suffocating, and drenched in wine. Even the stars seemed to avoid looking down, perhaps because King's Landing that night glowed like a lantern, with faulty wiring. Cersei sat in the great hall with a cup of red wine in hand, firelight slicing across her face like two thin blades. On nights of war, most people pray. But Cersei, as always, drank, and drank, and drank. If wine could speak, it would beg for mercy for being forced into permanent duty as the Queen's free emotional therapy. She let out a small laugh, the laugh of someone who understood that everything is temporary, even crowns. "They call me Queen," she murmured, "yet all day long I do only one thing: pay for the mistakes of others." Then her gaze flicked to Sansa, the young girl sitting beside her, hands clasped so tightly together it looked like she was trying to stop her own heart from falling out of her chest. Sansa looked like a flower battered by wind, unsure whether she was supposed to bloom or shatter. Ever since coming to court, she had learned that fairy tales were for children and for people who had never met a Lannister. She tried to sit straight, tried to smile politely, tried to be the good little lady she was taught to be. But outside were steel, fire, and death. And in here was Cersei, a woman with the beauty of a dagger hidden inside a rose. Cersei poured more wine, looking at Sansa with the cool appraisal of someone evaluating merchandise in a market. "You know," she said, voice soft as honey but with the bitterness of poison, "when men fight, women must decide how they will survive. Some pray, some choose other ways." Sansa swallowed hard. She wasn't old enough to understand everything Cersei meant by other ways, but she was smart enough to know it wasn't from any book meant for children. Her hands trembled like leaves touched by the northern winter. Her fragility made Cersei laugh, a low, cynical sound. "People say women are weak. I find men weaker. They fear failure, fear humiliation, fear failing to live up to the tales they spin. Women fear only one thing: surviving." Outside, the wildfire crackled in the distance like cursed fireworks. The eerie green light seeped through the windows, tinting the room with the color of a bad dream. Cersei leaned back, took another long sip, and studied Sansa's face. Too young to understand, too polite to resist, and too beautiful not to remind Cersei of every cruel calculation a queen makes to stay alive. "If Stannis enters the city," she said, her voice even, almost like a bedtime story, "what do you think he will do to us?" Sansa opened her mouth to say something kind, something naive. Perhaps, "You will be safe," or "We will be protected," but the words never came. She had lived long enough among Lannisters to know that kindness existed only in poems. Cersei continued before she could answer. "I do not wait for men to protect me." She lifted the edge of her gown, revealing a dagger. "I protect myself. And sometimes, I protect you too." Sansa froze. The air thickened. Even the candle flame seemed to shiver as if touched by something ghostly. In that moment, the chamber became a small stage, Cersei as the queen in full command, and Sansa as the only unwilling audience. The stories she once dreamed of, handsome princes, feasts, silk gowns, had long dissolved. All she wanted now was to survive the night. Then the door burst open. Loras and the Knights of the Reach entered like a gust of fresh air after a nightmare. Tywin had returned. Stannis' forces were pushed back. Victory arrived not with trumpets and angels, but with footsteps, clanging steel and the smell of dust. Cersei stood, quickly hid the dagger, and took a deep breath as if she had been calm the entire time. "You see," she said quietly, "men are useful, sometimes." Then she swept out of the room, her posture so regal that even her shadow looked proud. Sansa remained alone for a moment, heart lighter yet hands still trembling. She looked out the window, King's Landing engulfed in fire, smoke, and a thin haze of war. But amid the chaos, she understood one thing. Tonight wasn't just a battle between two armies. It was the night she learned her first real lesson about survival. A lesson taught not with blood, but with wine and the bitter smile of a queen. After the green flames of black water, Westeros woke like a survivor after a storm, the body intact, the soul bent out of shape. King's Landing was the same as ever, foul, hot, cramped, echoing with merchants shouting and the smell of rotting fish from the docks. But the people walking the streets had changed. They looked at each other with a bewildered stare, the kind you see in someone who almost became Stannis Baratheon's breakfast. Tyrion awoke in a dark room, a long slash across his face. The new scar sat there like war's signature. He had saved the city, but his power had been stripped away like leaves in autumn. No one knew he was the hero. No one mentioned his name. No one even bothered to check whether he survived the battle. Glory in King's Landing, it turned out, was just a feast where the guest of honor never got to eat. Cersei, on the other hand, smiled in triumph. Joffrey was still on the Iron Throne, alive, screaming, and issuing meaningless orders as he always did. The city still belonged to the Lannisters. This kind of victory was like cleaning a house after a party. Not cleaner, exactly, but at least it was still your house. Sansa walked across the courtyard with steps as light as someone learning to move again after a long nightmare. She understood. She was alive, but every breath now required calculation. Every word was a double-edged blade. Every smile was a mask. And sometimes, silence was the only thing that could save your life. Far away, Robb Stark, the king in the north, chose to marry for love, a decision as poetic as a soaring bird, romantic as a summer breeze, and as foolish as a disastrous battle plan. Westeros had never been kind to those who placed their hearts on the political chessboard, but Robb still smiled, believing in his path, because he had yet to see the red wedding waiting at the far end. In Korth, Daenerys walked through halls abandoned by the dead. Her 3 small dragons, once prized display pieces, now circled her, breathing hot air against her neck like living punctuation marks to a promise. All who harmed me will pay. Korth was beautiful but rotten, wealthy but empty, courteous yet poisonous. Daenerys left it like someone shaking off a bad dream, stepping into a new beginning, stronger, darker, and more certain of her destiny. And in the far north, where the cold cut like knives and snow fell like ash, Jon Snow stepped into the night with the free folk. Among ice peaks and clouds of white breath, he grasped something terrifying. The true enemy of Westeros wasn't Baratheon, Lannister, or Stark. It was the White Shadows awakening, quiet as wind threading through the pines. That night, the footprints of men grew fewer. The footprints of monsters grew more. Horns echoed long and hollow, drifting into the sky like the call of some ancient cold. And in the white mist, pale figures with icy blue eyes moved like nightmares still taking shape. They came slowly, unhurried, unbothered, as though the entire world was merely a playground waiting for them to enter. No one saw them, no one heard them, but everyone felt it. Something was approaching, quietly, like breath on the back of the neck. The silence of winter, long and heavy as frost on dead branches. The wars of men might go on for another 5 or 10 years, but the war between mankind and what walked in the snow had only just begun. The northern wind swept through, carrying a whisper soft as a lullaby. Winter is coming.